Hello everyone and welcome to JewelleryMaker Academy. My name is Mark Smith and in today's tutorials I'm going to be introducing you to the wonderful world that is the SuperDuo. In front of me I have all of the tools of the trade, all the equipment, all the materials that you're going to need to make all of the projects on today's tutorials. So most importantly we have our beading mat, because many of you seed beaders know we need something to hold our beads and stop them from rolling all over the floor. The three types of beads we're going to be using in the tutorials are the SuperDuos, which we'll look at closer in the first tutorial. Then I'm going to be using two sizes of Miyuki seed beads. We're going to be using the 11-0 and we're going to be using the 8-0. And the two numbers, the 11-0 and the 8-0, denotes to the number of seed beads whole uppermost in an inch. So 11-0, 11 in an inch, 8-0, 8-0 in an inch. Then we're going to need a sharp pair of scissors. We're going to be needing some beading needles, either a size 10 or a size 12. And we're going to be using Wildfire from Beaded, or we're going to be using Beadsmith Fireline, either or, it depends on your preference. We will be needing in the final chapter, when we're coming to do our beaded beads with SuperDuos, some 4mm round gemstones, or in this case shell pearl, 6mm and 8mm. We won't need a huge amount, just maybe 3 or 4 per earring. And then to finish off our jewellery pieces, a selection of toggle clasps, head pins, shepherd's hooks, etc., just to put all of our pieces together. And for that you will need a basic JewelleryMaker toolkit. So that's everything we're going to need. And in the first tutorial, I'm going to show you just how versatile the SuperDuo is when I introduce you to SuperDuo Peyote. So what is a SuperDuo? A SuperDuo is a pressed glass bead made in the Czech Republic. And for me, it has many names. Some people know them as little piggy snouts. I've heard that it resembles E.T., the extraterrestrial, or even barn owls. It depends on what you think, on where your imagination works. But a SuperDuo is an oval bead with 2 drill holes, hence the name SuperDuo, and the ends are slightly pinched. And that means that you're able to use round beads, whether it's seed beads or gemstones. It fits in, it's like a little enclave that the beads fit into beautifully. They tessellate perfectly if you want to make flowers or mandalas. They're absolutely wonderful in your basic seed beading techniques like your peyote or your right-angled weave, which we'll look at a bit later on. But for this chapter, I'm going to introduce you to a staple of all seed beading, and that's the peyote. And as you can see, I've got some beautiful pieces to my left here. We've got standard 4-row peyote here. And then with this piece here, we've made a wide cuff, which I've elaborated with some extra seed beading. Peyote is wonderful when you're doing the chevron pattern. So these two pieces here, this piece in particular is very serpent-like. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a very simple technique, but because you have the 2 drill holes, it fits perfectly in the world of peyote. So without further ado, let's do a bit of peyoting. So I've threaded my needle and I'm using a size 10 and I've gone for a black fireline and I've gone for this beautiful autumn range. Now all of these colours come from one tube, absolutely beautiful. So we're going to be completely random with these particular technique. So first of all, we're going to be using 11-0 seed beads. Now you're only going to be using the seed beads right at the beginning of your piece of work and right at the very end. Whole of peyote in this particular technique is done with nothing but the SuperDuos. But I'm going to use an 11-0 as a stopper bead. So I'm going to pick up my 11-0, I'm going to slide it down to the end of my thread, leaving a tail of approximately 6 inches, and I'm going to go round the back and back up through the seed bead. Going to pull, and what happens is this slides up and down your thread, but it'll just stop you from losing all of your beads when you come to do your completed project. And then once you've finished, all you're going to do is slide the stopper bead off to attach your clasp. So we're going to do a row of peyote first of all, and this is going to be using our 11-0s. So first of all, we're going to start with a SuperDuo, and I'll just quickly point out that it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes during the manufacturing process, one of the two holes in a couple of the SuperDuos may be blocked with dust residue, right? So I would definitely recommend, before you start any project, go through the whole tube. It'll only take you about 5 minutes. Lay all your beads down flat and just check that both sides are clear. You may get 1 or 2 blockages in the tube. You don't get very many at all. But if you are halfway through your project and you go back to a row that you've already sewn through and one of the holes is blocked, you may have to start the whole project again rather than try to pierce the hole on the SuperDuo. So it's well worth taking that little 5 minutes to begin with. So we're going to thread our first SuperDuo, and then we're going to pick up an 11-0, a SuperDuo, an 11-0, a SuperDuo, 11-0, and a SuperDuo. Obviously, it depends on how wide you want your cuff bracelet, but I think a row of 4 SuperDuos with 3 11-0s in between is a really nice amount to start with. So we're going to slow those down all the way down to our stopper bead. So from now on, we're not going to be picking up any other beads apart from our SuperDuos until we get to the bottom end. So to do our peyote, it's exactly the same as we would do peyote with our basic seed beads. You can already see we've got the castellations ready for our next row of SuperDuos. But at the moment, I'm in the wrong place. I want to go back towards the spaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my beading up in my left hand, and I'm exiting the first hole of the SuperDuo. All I'm going to do is take my needle across and sew down through the second hole. So you will have exposed thread on both sides of your work. So you can now see that I'm in the right direction to add my next row of SuperDuos. And all we're going to do is pick up our supers and fill in the gaps until we get to that other end. So we pick up a SuperDuo, we sew into the next hole of the first SuperDuo, pull that nice and tight, and you can see that it fits nice and neatly, pull that tight, okay, in the gap. So flip that over, going to take our next SuperDuo, we're going to fill in the gap, pull that nice and tight, and then we'll fill in our last gap, and we're going to jump the gap so we're on that outside edge. Pull that nice and tight and lay that down flat so you can see. Now, the first row will curve ever so slightly, but once we come to do our next rows, it'll straighten up. So now we want to come back down the second side, but there's no SuperDuo to hold on to. So what are we going to do? So I always flip my work, so I'm working in the same direction every time away from me. So all we're going to do is we're going to pick up our next SuperDuo, and we're going to sew into the first of the row that we've just encountered. So just take my needle through. Pull that nice and tight. And the first thing you will notice, there we go, is that at the moment it's free flowing, okay? It's sticking out at the end. It will do at this point until we come back and we'll grab it. It'll be revealed once we get to the rest of the row. So I'm going to pick up my next SuperDuo, jump the gap, pull nice and tight, pick up our next SuperDuo, jump the gap. You can already see it starting to straighten out now. Okay, so we're at the point where we need to add our next SuperDuo. So I'm going to pick up my next SuperDuo. I'm going to slide that down. I'm going to lay it flat, and you can now see that I want to head back down this row. Now, do you remember when we did the first row on the first section, we came out of one hole, we went across and down through the second. So we're going to do that here. So I'm exiting the left side of the SuperDuo, and I'm going to come down the right side, pulling that nice and tight. I'm going to lay my work down, and you can now see we're ready to do our next row. So I'm going to pick up my next bead, jump the gap, pulling that nice and tight, and you can already see it's already starting to straighten out, and you're getting that beautiful tessellation. Next super, jump the gap, and our next super, and this will pick up the SuperDuo that we left dangling at the top. So don't be perturbed if you see it sticking out at an angle with nothing attaching it, because then what we're going to do is come in and grab it with the row before. Okay, so you can see it quickly builds up and you get this absolutely beautiful pattern. So we're coming back down this row again. So I'm going to pick up my next SuperDuo and I'm going to sew down into the row. And you will notice that it's sticking out at an angle. Don't worry, that we'll pick it up on the way back. So I'm going to flip my work over and we're going to fill in the gaps. So into the next, pulling nice and tight. So into the next, pull nice and tight. And then we need to come back down this way. So we're going to pick up our SuperDuo. We're going to lay it in position. And we're going to sew back down the second side. Like so. And I'm going to lay my work down. And now we're ready in the right position to go back up. And you can see the SuperDuo jaunty angle at the top. We're going to fill the gap and we're going to grab it. So we'll just fill in those gaps. That's our first, pulling nice and tight. And then our second. Then our third. And then this will grab hold of that SuperDuo that we left on that side. And then we're going to flip it over. Now what you'll notice if I show the top here, can you see this is the free floating side, the jet of the SuperDuo that we grab on the way back up. And can you see it has a little thread bridge going from bead to bead. Okay, in between the gaps you can just see the thread. On this side you'll notice that the thread is on top of the SuperDuos, but not in the side. So you know that one side will always have the gap in between the SuperDuos, and the other side will always have the thread bridge. If that's the case, you know you're doing each side right. So what we're going to do is when we get to the end of our work, so you would continue with this pattern until you got to the length of your bracelet you need, and you need to end with a group of 4. So at the moment we've got a group of 3, so we know we need to add another row of SuperDuos. You always want a mirror image. So I'm going to pick up my next SuperDuo. I'm going to sew down into the first from the previous row. And again we've got our little thread bridge and the bead is sticking out at an angle, which we'll pick up on the way back. And then I'm going to fill in the gaps all the way down. Pick up the next, sew through, and then we're going to do our last bead on this side. And again, once you get to this point, the beading is telling you, so we know that we're doing the thread bridge over the SuperDuo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down through that bead, and then as we've reached the end, we're going to fill the gaps with our 11/0 seed beads that we did at the beginning. So I'm going to pick up an 11/0, sew into the gap, which will bring our work neatly in together at the end. Then our next 11/0, and then our third 11/0, which will grab hold of this SuperDuo at the angle and bring it in nice and neatly, like so. So now you can see we've got mirror image on either side. We've got our SuperDuos and we've got our SuperDuo on the other end. So if I bring this one across here, which is the same width, can you see what we're going to do then is with these 11/0 seed beads that we've got, using the same colour, we're going to go across, we're going to add between 8 and 10 of your 11/0 seed beads to form a seed bead loop. And then we're just going to meander through 3 or 4 rows of our SuperDuos with our needle. Then we're going to cut off our thread. And then using our tail that we left at the beginning of our piece of work, we'll do the same. So we'll slide off the stopper bead, we'll meander through until we get to the first 11/0. We'll do our little seed bead loop, and then we'll meander backwards and forwards, and then as you can see, we've got our seed bead loops that we will then add our clasp and our jump rings to. So again, this is a mixed tube with a matte turquoise peacock finish, which is just absolutely beautiful. And I love peyote with SuperDuos because you get this amazing undulation pattern. It's like material. And this is actually, I can show you, this is the top of the bracelet where we have the thread bridges between the SuperDuos. And then on the other side, we have the thread on the SuperDuo with the gap either side. So as long as you keep checking your sides, your top and bottom, just to check that you're doing the technique correctly, you'll soon build up the most beautiful, beautiful SuperDuo peyote. I have to say, this is one of my favourite peyote beads. It's just beautiful the way it moves. It's just absolutely amazing. So that was our peyote with our SuperDuos, and we've had a nice introduction into the world of SuperDuos. So come along with me and join me for tutorial number 3. Welcome back. In the first of 2 rope tutorials that I'm going to show you, this one is all about the right angled weave. And what I love about this, again, very, very versatile technique, is I've got a few pieces here to my left. Now it's called a rope, but in fact you can make 360-degree bracelets. You can join them together. This is simply a roll-on, roll-off. We've got another version here that I've actually threaded wire through to make a beautiful open and closing bracelet. I've made longer sections of the rope to complete this beautiful memory wire piece. This is on memory wire necklace. And then these 2 necklaces here, this one is knotted using seed beads, and again I've made little sections, and again this one here using shell pearls and varying colours of the SuperDuo. Or you can make a long line rope as it's intended, but as I said, it's so versatile, so there are 4 different pieces there, all with the same technique on a variation of the right angled weave. So it's a very, very simple technique. It's very repetitive, and you could probably learn the whole technique in about 5 minutes, and you just keep repeating and repeating and repeating. So again, you'll be using 11/0 seed beads, and the SuperDuo I've chosen is this really cute aqua blue. Now you can use as many of your SuperDuos in a circle to start as you like, but just bear in mind that the more you use, the larger the interior is going to be. And sometimes, especially when you're making a cylindrical rope with a large aperture running through the center, your rope will tend to flatten. So I always go for 4, and that's a really nice size, either 3, 4, or 5. The second rope that I'm going to show you a bit later on in the tutorial will be using 3, so I think 4 is a really nice number to get started in this technique. So again, I've got a size 10 needle, and I'm going to be using Fireline. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up 4 of our SuperDuos, alternating with 4 of our 11/0s. So again, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're just going to check our drill holes. So we're going to pop 1, an 11/0, SuperDuo 11, SuperDuo 11, SuperDuo 11. Okay, so we've got 4 SuperDuos and 4 11/0s in between. So we don't need a stopper bead on here because we're making a full closed circle. So I'm just going to go about 6 inches from the end of my thread. I'm just going to tie a single knot, not overly tight, followed by a second single knot. Just make sure we don't cross over our beading. Perfect. Okay, so we've got a cross in effect of 4 SuperDuos and 4 11/0s. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew away from the knot. So I'm going to sew through the next SuperDuo and the next 11/0, and I'm going to exit through the SuperDuo, the inner hole, the bottom of the 2 holes. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to do what's called a step up. So I'm exiting the interior of the 2 holes, and I'm going to jump across to the exterior and sew back through, like so. And I'm using the black thread just so you can see the thread journey. So what we're going to do next is we're going to fill the gaps in between the 4 SuperDuos with another 11-0. And don't be perturbed that there's a big gap with a small bead, well, all will be revealed. So an 11-0, jump the gap, turn, 11-0, jump the gap, pull that through, and then picking up our next 11-0, jumping the gap into the exterior hole, and then we're going to jump the gap into the first hole. Okay, so if I lay that down flat, so you can now see we've got our cross of 4 SuperDuos, our 4 interior 11-0s, and now we have our 4 exterior 11-0s. So at this point what we're going to do is we're going to cinch. So we're just going to concertina all the beading together, pulling on that working thread. So you can now see that we've got this little round of SuperDuos. So before we do our right angled weave, what I like to do is I just like to secure the previous round. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew through the 11-0s and the SuperDuos in that round. You don't have to do this, but I like my rope to be slightly more rigid than you would generally. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the last one, and we need to exit through an 11-0. So I'm going to exit through the next, like so. And what I'm going to do, so it doesn't get in the way, I'm just going to trim my tail so it doesn't spoil your viewing. So you can now see that we've got this little cup, and now we're going to start the rope. So this is the right angled weave. So what we're going to do is we're going to exit the 11-0 that we've just pointed out, and we're going to do what's called a picot. And this is a really cute little name for a section of right angled weave. So a picot consists of 4 11-0s, and the first 11-0 is the bead that we're exiting, so we're adding another 3. So we're going to pick up 1, 2, 3 11-0s, and we're going to go round the back of the 11-0 we're exiting, sew back through it, and then sew through the next SuperDuo that follows it. And you should be left with a little diamond of 4 11-0s, perfectly against that blue, isn't it? Sew through the next 11-0, and then we're going to pick up 3 more, 1, 2, 3. We're going to go round the back of the bead we're exiting, sew back through it into the next SuperDuo. Pull the thread, so we now have our second diamond. Sew into the next 11-0. Pick up 3 11-0s. Sew round the back of the bead we're exiting, back through, exit through the SuperDuo. Put that nice and tight, and then we're going to do our final picot. So we sew through the interior 11-0, pick up 3 more 11s, and then we're going to go round the back and sew through the 11-0 that we're exiting. Okay, so if I just place that down, you can see the position that we're at. So now we have our 4 SuperDuos with our 4 picots. So what we're going to do next is we're going to sew through the next SuperDuo and the next 11-0. Sew that through. And now what we want to do is we would need to do what's called a step up to start our next round. So you can see that I'm exiting the interior 11-0. We're going to follow throw the thread journey around the next 2 11-0s, so we exit through that exterior 11-0. So I'm going to sew through 2 11-0s, that's the first one, and this is the second. So you can now see that I'm exiting. So now we've got a big gap in between our 4 corner points, and we're going to fill those corner points with our next row of SuperDuos. So pick up our SuperDuo and sew through, turn, pick up our next SuperDuo, jump the gap into the outermost corner. That's our second. Then we're going to pick up our third, jump the gap, turn, pick up our fourth, so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hold on to the thread and we're going to cinch, and we're going to pull everything up. So you can see now that those 4 SuperDuos are sat nice and neatly above the groups of 4 little picots. So what we're going to do next is we're going to sew through the next SuperDuo, and we're going to step up. So we're exiting through the interior hole, we're going to jump up to the exterior, and then we're going to fill in the gaps with 1 11/0. So this is what we did in our first round on the flat. So from now on, because our rope has started, we'll continue our rope shape. And after a few rows, you've got something to hold on to. It's much easier to do your beading. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. As we mentioned in the first row, I like to strengthen my rope, so I'm just going to sew through all of those beads once more. As I said, you don't have to do this if you want a more fluid rope, but especially if you're making little station sections like this, it's always best to have more of a rigid structure. So I'm going to go all the way around and exit through the picot, the 11/0 to start our picot. So we're going to go back to our 11/0s. So I'm exiting, I'm going to pick up 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go around the back through the 11/0, I'm exiting, and the next SuperDuo, and just so happens I've managed to go through the next 11/0 as well. So I'll continue with that. Pick up 3, 1, 2, 3. Go around the back of the bead I'm exiting, through the 11 and the next SuperDuo, like so, through the next 11/0. Pick up 3 11s, 1, 2, 3, round the back, through the bead, and again I've managed to go through the next 11. Sometimes this will happen, sometimes not, so just be a bit patient. Do my last picot on this round, and I'm going to sew through the next SuperDuo into the next interior 11/0. This is where we're going to do our step up. So I'm just going to lay my little picot flat. So we need, at the moment we're in the interior hole, we need to get to the exterior. So I'm going to sew through 2, 1 and 2. And then we're going to fill in the gaps. You can see already I'm able to cinch with my fingers to make out a little cup already. So what we're going to do is just going to fill the gaps with our SuperDuos. So that's 1, 2, 3 and 4, like so. And again I'm going to sew round and strengthen the row. And obviously I'm using, for this tutorial, I'm using black thread, but if I was making a piece of jewellery at home, I would be using white. I just wanted it for you to be able to see the technique. So we've done our round, we're in that interior hole. I'm going to step up to the outside of that SuperDuo, and then we're ready to add our single row of 11/0s. So we're going to fill the gap, we're going to fill the gap, going to fill the gap. So you can see how repetitive it is, how very therapeutic it is, and it actually builds quite quickly. Okay, so again, I would go round my section, and then I would do my next row of picots. I would step up to the picot, then have my next row of SuperDuos, and as you can see, it makes the most beautiful little beaded sections. And I'll just bring this rope across to show you on the camera here. So what I did with this particular necklace is I made a 6-inch length of the rope, and to finish off, all you would do is you would simply take your needle and sew round and round and round until you can't get the needle out any further, and then you would cut away your thread. I've slid that onto memory wire, I've popped in a 6mm shell pearl, and then I've made a 4-inch section and then an 1.5 inch section. But if you wanted to, you could just make one continuous long rope, which you would then slide onto memory wire. So that is your right-angled weave using your SuperDuos. I think we're going to make another bracelet, and it's one of my favourite techniques, which I've coined the butterfly stitch. Welcome back to chapter 4, and this chapter is all about a beautiful technique which I've coined the butterfly stitch. I think it is a variation of the right-angled weave, but I prefer butterfly stitch. And as you can see, again, it's so incredibly versatile depending on the colour mix that you use. We go from a parquet flooring, we go to, again, a sort of a snake skin. It's quite a Moroccan look here. We can go monochrome down the black and white route, really vibrant. And we've actually changed the design here. Look, so we've got stripes at the beginning, and then we go into a diamond pattern, and then we revert back to stripes again. So it's all completely versatile. And all the little sections here are resembling little butterflies. So you can see with the white and the pink here, the white sections, for example, we have a set of lower wings and a set of upper wings. So that's how it gets its name, the butterfly stitch. And as again, you can keep it as simple as I'm going to show you, or afterwards you can embellish if you want to, just to add another layer of beading. So you can see they're quite prominent on the top of this beautiful bracelet. But again, it's very, very simple. It's I think it's a cross between peyote and a right-angled weave, to be honest. But as I said, I think butterfly stitch is a very apt name for it. So for this, you will need 8O seed beads, not 11Os, but 8Os. So I've got a beautiful Ceylon white 8O, and then the colours I've chosen are the gold and purple. Now I have got a little group of 11Os here. I need one 11O because I need a stopper bead. So we'll just put those to one side. So I've got, again, size 10 needle, and I'm going to be using black thread just so it's nice and easy for you to see at home. I'm going to slide the stopper bead. Again, leave between 6 and 8 inches of thread at the bottom, and then we're just going to go back through and up our stopper bead, so you still have room for it to move, and it just stops your beading from falling off. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide on the number of rows. You can do as many rows as you like on this cuff, depending on how wide you want your bracelet to be, but for the tutorial I'm going to go for 3 butterflies wide. So I'm not going to add a bead first of all. I'm going to go straight into my SuperDuos, and I'm going to pick up a gold, followed by a purple, then an 8O, and then you want to get your matching pair. You want to pick up the colour that you've just left. So we've just left a purple, so now I'm going to pick up a purple and a gold, then an 8O, and then we want our second of our pair, so we need to pick up a gold and a purple. Okay, so we've got 2 gold, 2 purple, with a gold and a purple either side. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide those beads down so they meet the stopper bead, like so. Now from now on, we are either going to add 8O beads or we're going to add SuperDuos. We never now add both in a single row. It is just at the beginning and when we get to the other end of our cuff. So facing the wrong direction. So if you remember back to our peyote in chapter 2, I'm going to do what's called a step up. So I'm going to go from the left hand bead across to the right, and I'm going to sew up through the first SuperDuo and pull that nice and tight. So if you look at it now, can you see that we never have the 8O beads in a row? They're always off center. And you can see now that we've got this little gap formed in between the purple and the gold SuperDuo. So we're going to pick up an 8O, we're going to fill the gap, and we're going to jump into the next gold. Okay, so we're going to, where there's an 8O already, we can't have 2 next to each other, so we're going to jump the gap. So we're going to pull the gap nice and tight, and you can see now that those 2 SuperDuos fold together. If I flip this across, we've got a gap there, ready and waiting for our 8O. So we're going to jump the gap, sew through 2, pull that through nice and tight, and then once we've got our last bead, we've got a gap just here that we're going to fill with our third 8/0. So if we pull nice and tight and lay that down flat, you can now see already it's starting to build up. Okay, so now we're coming back in the other direction. And very similar to the peyote, you will have a top to your bracelet and you will have a bottom to your bracelet. The top, you will have a little thread bridge in between the SuperDuos. And on the bottom, as you can see here, the thread, it goes across the top of the SuperDuo. Okay, so we know that it's going to alternate the same way. I'm going to flip my work. So I'm going to pick up a gold and I'm going to sew into the 8/0. Now, do you remember, we don't pick up 8/0s and SuperDuos in the same round, so we know we're on a SuperDuo round. Okay, so again, that's free floating at the moment, but we'll pick that up on the way back. So we're going to continue our 4 bead butterfly. So we've got 2 purple SuperDuos here. So I'm going to pick up 2 more. So 1 and 2. I'm going to jump the gap into the next 8/0. So you can now see that they sit with the 2 pairs of butterfly wings. Then we're going to finish off our pairing with the gold. So I'm going to pick up 2 gold. I'm going to jump the gap. Pull the thread nice and tight. There we go. So you can now see we've got our gold butterfly, and we're going to finish with a purple. Now you can see that this is a thread bridge over the SuperDuo, so we know that we're going to pick up our SuperDuo, and I find it easier to let it slide down to the bottom, and then you can already see, if I lay that down flat, that the gaps are waiting for our 8/0s. The beads tell you where to put the next 8/0. So we've got a little gap here. We know that there isn't an 8/0 here, we never have them together, so we're going to close the gap between the 2. Going to pull that nice and tight. There we go. And now you can see that we've got a nice finished end to our beading here. So now we know that we've just had a SuperDuo round, so we're going to have an 8/0 round. So I'm going to pick it up and we're going to fill the gaps with an 8/0 bead. So I'm going to go through 2, and you can see the beading is telling you that there's no space there for an 8/0. We can't have 2 8/0s on top of each other, so we know that we need to sew through the 2 and draw them together nice and neatly, which we've done there. We've got 1 more 8/0. We're going to jump all the way through into the 2. Pull that nice and tight, so then when we lay it flat, you can now see that we've got our first row of butterflies. So now we're going to alternate the butterfly pattern. So we're going to start with a purple, okay, and a gold, because we want to alternate the 2 colours, and there's a space there for 2. So I'm going to pick up a purple followed by gold. Going to sew through the gap. So basically we're back to what we did in our right at the beginning of our piece. Pull that through, like so. And as I said, the purple will be off kilter at the moment because we need to come in and fill in the gap. So we want to change, so we've just exited a gold, so we're going to pick up a gold followed by a purple. Pull that through. And then we're going to pick up a purple and a gold to finish off the butterfly. And then we're going to slide those down like so. And then what we're going to do is, this is the turnaround, is we want to check on the top, so we know it's going to be thread bridge over the SuperDuo. So we've picked up 2 SuperDuos, we're going to sew down through 1, which will get us now in the right position. So if I lay that down now, you'll see now that we've got the gaps for the 8/0s. And you'll also notice that we start with 2 8/0s, then 3 8/0s, 2 8/0s, 3 8/0s. So just check that you're doing it correctly. We've got a gap there, a gap there, and a gap there, so we know we're doing it correctly. So I'm going to flip over my work, and we're going to fill the gaps. So an 8-0 into the 2, because we never have an 8-0 on top of each other. So you can now see when you pull nice and tight, that SuperDuo sits into position. And then we're going to pick up our next 8-0, sew through 2. There's still space for one more. This is off kilter, as in the peyote tutorial we did earlier. So we know that we're going to fill the gap, which will then grab it and pull it back into position. So we'll just finish off this row. I'm going to flip it over. So we now know that we're doing SuperDuos, because we don't add SuperDuos and 8-0s in one row. So I'm going to pick up a purple, and we now know that this is jumping from bead to bead. So I'm going to pick up a purple. I'm going to sew into the 8, like so. And again, it'll be a bit wobbly at this point, but we'll pick it up on the way back. Then we're going to pick up 2 gold, because we're finishing off our golden butterfly. Pull that through nice and tight. And then we're going to finish our purple butterfly. So I'm going to pick up 2 purple. Like so. And then we know that we're finishing off with the gold, and we know that we're doing a thread bridge over the gold. So I'm going to pick up a SuperDuo. I'm going to lay that down flat, and I'm going to sew down through 2, because there's not a gap and we don't have an 8-0 on top of an 8. So I'm going to sew down through, putting that nice and tight, turn it over so it's easier for me to sew away. We've got the gaps waiting. So an 8-0 through the 2, and then an 8-0 through the 2, which will bring that last SuperDuo in together like so. And you can just double check. So we've got thread bridge over the SuperDuos, thread bridge over the SuperDuos. Check the other side. We've got the thread on the SuperDuo, so we know we're in the right track. So at this point, what we would do next is we know that we're adding SuperDuos. We know that we've got a thread bridge. This time we're reverting back to our gold butterfly first. So I'm going to pick up a gold, followed by a purple, like so. And I'm going to sew down through. Let me come back out of that. And I'm going to sew into the 8-0. So those two come across. And then I'm going to finish off the purple butterfly. So I'm going to pick up a purple followed by gold. You don't have to alternate here, but I think it's really nice to get that sort of checkerboard pattern. Or you could have stripes, or you can have a play. It's a great technique to have a play with. And then a gold followed by a purple. I'm going to slide those down. And we know that we're having a thread bridge on the SuperDuo. And if you look, those two are closed together, so we know that we're only going to sew through 1. Oops, slide that down. And then we can fill in the gaps. So an 8-0 through 1, because there's no space, and that'll draw that edge bead in nice and neatly. And we've got 2 spaces left for 8-0s. So I'm going to sew through the first one, and then sew through the next, which will grab hold of that gold SuperDuo, and pulling it tight, we'll bring it back into position, like so. And we'll just finish off this side. So we start with the gold. So I'm picking up a gold straight into the 8-0. Then we've got 2 purple to finish off this butterfly. Then we're going to pick up 2 gold to finish off this butterfly, like so. And then we're going to end with a purple to finish off the purple edge. We've got a thread bridge over the bead, so we know we're going to slide the SuperDuo down, and we're going to thread bridge through 2 because there's no gap. I'm going to flip over my work, and we've got 2 gaps. The row before we had 3 8, so we know that this row is going to have 2. So we're going to sew through the 2, pulling nice and tight, and then through 2. Pull again nice and tight, and then we're ready then to swap our colour. So we revert back to the purple, gold, exactly the same way. So we're back to the beginning where we started on your original display. Now there's different ways of finishing off. What I've done here is I've made some little, using again the 8/0s, I've made a little 8/0 seed bead loop, which I've then attached jump rings and a clasp. And then this one here, as you can see, I've used again 8/0s to make a little seed bead loop either end. Just find the center of the edge. Now in between here I've got a gold butterfly, so it's only right that I make the seed bead loop coming out from that middle 8/0. And again I've popped on some jump rings, and this time I've used an S hook to pop on this one here. But there's so many different ways of finishing off, but fundamentally you want to use the 8/0 beads that you already have on the end to make a seed bead loop, then to attach your clasp to. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's one of my favourite SuperDuo techniques, the butterfly stitch. Another of my favourites I'm about to show you now, which is probably the most simple way of making a seed bead rope using SuperDuos, and it's called the simple spiral. Welcome back to chapter 5. In this tutorial I'm going to show you another of the SuperDuo rope techniques, and this one I've coined the simple spiral. And I make it my duty to teach you how to do this in 5 minutes, and it's probably the quickest rope technique that I've encountered so far in my jewellery making journey. And what I love about it is not only you get this incredible 3-colour spiral, but it's the movement. It's that sinewy snake serpentine movement that you only get, I think, with SuperDuo ropes. We've got this beautiful carnival colour here, and then this one here, it's subtle, it's Mother of the Bride, it's subdued, it's pastel tone. So just have a really nice experiment again with colour. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, as I mentioned when we did the right-angled weave rope earlier, there is a certain amount of beads that you can use in the round. As I mentioned, 3, 4 or 5. I probably wouldn't use more than 5 in the round, because as we mentioned, you do get that hole going through the center of your rope, and after a while, if it's too open, your rope will flatten, and we don't want that. So for the right angled weave with the little picots that we encountered in the earlier chapter, I had 4 SuperDuos in the round. For me personally, I think 3 is absolutely perfect for this rope. It just keeps everything nice and compact, but you don't lose the movement and the fluidity from the move. So 3 colours of SuperDuos. I've gone for green, blue and silver in this technique. And unlike the butterfly, which was 8/0s, we're going back to 11/0s. So you just need 1 colour of 11/0 and 3 colours of your SuperDuos. Size 10 needle, black file line. You don't need a stopper bead. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 3 of our SuperDuos and 3 of our 11/0s alternating. So let's go for silver, 11/0, blue, 11/0, green, 11/0. And again, once again, as I mentioned in the first chapter, always check your drill holes before you start any of your projects. So we're going to slide the beads down. Again, 6 to 8 inch tail, and we're going to tie a single knot followed by a second single knot, like so. And just make sure that you don't cross over your knots. There we go. So if I lay that down flat, you can see now we've got our 3 SuperDuos and our 3 11/0s in this triangular form. So what we need to do is we need to sew away from the knot. So I'm going to sew through the next SuperDuo, and I'm going to sew through the 11/0. We need to exit through the 11/0 to start the technique. So we'll pull that through. So from now on, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking up an 11/0 followed by the colour of the SuperDuo that you are going to be entering. So in this case, it's going to be blue. Okay, so I'm going to pick up an 11-0 and a blue, and I'm going to be sewing up into the outermost empty hole of the blue SuperDuo. This is the one and the only step up that we're going to be doing throughout the entire necklace. So I'm going to pull that through into position. So now you should have two 11-0s stacked next to each other and two blue SuperDuos. So if we've got that right, we're ready to go with the technique. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up an 11-0 and a colour of the SuperDuo we're going to be entering, which is the green in this case. But this time I'm just going to jump the gap into the green outermost seed bead hole. I'm going to turn my work, I'm going to pick up an 11-0, and I'm going to pick up a silver because that's the bead I'm going to be entering. So we jump the gap into the silver. So you can see now that we've got three groups of two SuperDuo adjacent to each other, and then three groups of our 11-0s. So at this point, what I'm going to do, first I'm going to just cut off my tail so it doesn't impede your view. And all we're going to do now is pull the thread ever so slightly, and we need to form a little cup. So this will be the start of our rope. So it's a bit fiddly the first couple of rows, but once we get past that, it'll be absolutely fine. So what are we going to do? We're going to pick up an 11-0, followed by the colour of the SuperDuo we're going to be entering, blue in this case. So jump the gap into the blue, pull that through, like so. Pick up an 11-0, SuperDuo you're entering, which is the green. So I'm going to sew into the green, pull nice and tight, turn, 11-0, pick up a silver, that's the colour we're entering, jump the gap into the silver, pull it nice and tight, like so, pick up an 11-0 into the blue, pull the thread, there we go, pick up an 11-0, so 11-0, pick up a green into the green, every time just pull nice and tight with the thread, pick up an 11-0, pick up a silver, jump the gap into the silver. I'll do a couple more and then I'll show you the magic. So we're going into a blue, so it's always an 11-0 followed by the colour that you're entering. So 11-0 and green, and then 11-0 and our silver. Again, pulling nice and tight. I tend to hold it in my fingers and pull away from me, and that just gives it a bit more structure. And then we're going to pick up an 11-0 followed by blue. Pull the thread. Then pick up an 11-0 followed by green into the green. Turn, pick up an 11-0 followed by a silver, that's the colour we're entering, and all you're going to do is you're going to follow this simple little technique and you will start to see the little spiral rope starting to form already. So we've only been doing this for 3 or 4 minutes and we've already got an inch of rope. So all you would do now is you would continue with your spiraling, and then when you come to the end you would get to this point. So can you see I've got a silver, but I'm exiting the silver below it because this is the last silver one that we added. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump the gap with an 11-0, but without a SuperDuo. So I'm going to jump the gap into the blue, and you can see this draws the beading together. Then I'm going to pick up an 11-0 into the green, pulling nice and tight. And you can see it cinching it all into a nice neat finish. Then an 11-0 into the silver, And now what we're going to do now is we're not adding any beads at all. All we're going to do is we're going to sew all the way around, cinching it all in nice and neatly. So we've got 3 11-0s and we've got 3 SuperDuos. So we're just going to sew round and round. And again, I'm not a fan of tying off and cutting my thread. I like to work my thread into my piece of work. So I'm just going to sew round and round and round until I can't get the needle through any further. So if you're using 11-0s, you probably won't get more than maybe 3 or 4 repeats all the way through. And I'm also using a size 10 needle as well, so that won't take as long. Okay, pull that nice and tight, and then we're ready then, safe to cut off our thread. And you can see now that the 3 ends have cinched. We've got our 3 SuperDuos with our 3 11-0s, as we had at the bottom. We've got our 3 11s and our 3 SuperDuos, and you can see how beautiful that little spiral sits in position. As I said, one of the most simple techniques, but I think one of the most beautiful, beautiful ropes. If I just bring the completed piece across, you can see just how fluid this beautiful necklace is. And to finish off, to add a clasp, all I've done is I've taken a needle into the inside, I've hooked underneath one of the little thread bridges into my clasp, sew round twice, go around into the next SuperDuo, back through the clasp twice, back down through the SuperDuo. So I've gone through probably 6 times to make a nice little thread attachment there to my toggle clasp, and then I've repeated that on the other side. So it's very, very secure, very, very safe. What you can do, if you have any Kumihimo bell caps in your stash, the larger varieties, you may be able to even pop a little bell cap over the top, securing with some jewellery making glue, leave it overnight, and that, again, that'll give you a nice neat finish to your rope. But as you can see, it's one of the most beautiful, simple rope techniques there are, and that's all down to the fact that that lovely SuperDuo has got the 2 drill holes, and it's absolutely perfect for this type of technique. So, in our last chapter, I'm going to show you to make our first earrings in our tutorial session, and it's going to have a little hidden surprise, and this is all about making beaded beads. Welcome back to our final chapter in today's journey into the world of SuperDuos, and I thought I would do something with a bit of a twist. So I'm going to introduce you to the world of the SuperDuo beaded bead, which in effect, it dabbles in peyote, but it has a little hidden little secret, which will come to light as we progress with the technique. So as you can see, we've got the most beautiful beaded earrings, and you're probably wondering how they're keeping their shape. Well, all will be revealed. So in front of me, I have a range of SuperDuos. I've got these 2 beautiful blue SuperDuos. I've got an 11-0 seed bead, and I've also got a range of, in this case, shell pearl, but any gemstone that you have in your stash or glass bead. And I'm using a 4mm, a 6mm, and an 8mm. Okay, the 8mm you won't actually see, which is probably giving the game away now. So it doesn't matter what you use because it's going to be hidden inside the beaded bead. So if you have some odds and end gemstones or shell pearls, etc. in your stash, keep those to one side specifically for this technique. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, I've gone for 2 shades of this beautiful capri blue, and also, just to add, you also need a few head pins and shepherd hooks for your earrings. Okay, so I'll just pop these to one side. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up 4 of our first colour SuperDuo, alternating with an 11-0. So let's go for the lighter of the 2 blues. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's make sure we've got 4 11-0s and 4 SuperDuos. Perfect. And we don't need to stop a bead because we're going to be making a closed circle. So I'm just going to tie a single knot, followed by another single knot, like so. Okay, So we've got our square of 4 SuperDuos and our 4 11Os. So first thing we're going to do is sew away from the knot, as we always do. So I'm going to sew through the SuperDuo. I'm going to sew through the next 11O and then the SuperDuo. And what we're going to do, the first step, is we're going to do a step up, which we all know is coming out from the interior of the 2 drill holes across to the exterior. And in this gap, let me just cut that tail off. We don't want it getting in the way of your view. In the gap, we're going to pick up, again, the same colour SuperDuo, but this time we're going to pick up 2 with an 11O in between. So I'm going to flip my work over. So I'm going to pick up a SuperDuo, same colour blue, an 11O and a SuperDuo, and I'm going to jump the gap into the SuperDuo from the first round. And what you want is to have the 2 11Os parallel to each other. If you've got that, if that's the case, you've got that right, so we know we're on the right track. I'm going to turn my work, pick up a SuperDuo, an 11O and a SuperDuo, jump the gap into the next SuperDuo in the first round, and then we're going to repeat. So SuperDuo, 11O, SuperDuo, jump the gap, and then we'll do our 4th section. So SuperDuo, 11O, SuperDuo, and we're going to sew across into the first SuperDuo of that round into the interior hole of the SuperDuo that we've just added, diagonally straight across. It will be quite clear when you come to do this little bit of beading. I'm going to pull. So now you'll see that we've got this beautiful chevron square. Now that in itself makes a beautiful design. We could finish there if we wanted to, but we want to continue with the beaded bead. So what I'm going to do next is we're coming out of the interior hole of that SuperDuo. We're going to step up into the exterior hole. So all we're going to do is step across, like so. Let's make sure we've got all of our open holes. There we go, perfect. Okay, so we've got our piece of work and we're coming out of that exterior hole. So now can you see all the way around the outside, we've got 8 gaps. So we're going to fill those 8 gaps with our second colour SuperDuo, no 11Os, purely SuperDuos. So I'm going to hold that in my hand, bring those across, and we're simply going to fill the gaps all the way around with the second colour. So 1, don't pull too tight at this point, then 2, turn, then our 3rd. And some gaps will be larger than others, but all will become clear in a second. And then 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we're going to sew into the next SuperDuo in that round, followed by the next SuperDuo, which is the first of the dark blue we added. Okay, so what we're going to do next is this is where we're going to now pull and cinch. So I'm going to place it upside down, I'm going to pop my finger in, and I'm going to pull. And you can now start to see our little dome forming, like so. So what we're going to do next is I'm in the interior hole, I'm going to do a step up to the exterior hole. And again, I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So what we're going to do now is we're going to replicate our first row, because there are only 5 rows in this beaded bead. So now we know that we're going to start to add very soon our little 11Os. So we're going to revert back to our pale blue SuperDuos, and this will be a round without 11 O's. So we're going to pick up an 11 and we're going to jump the gap. Oops, there we go, pull that nice and tight. So you can now see we've got that lovely pale blue in position. Now can you see now we've got an 11O and a pale blue, so we need to replicate that in this side. So I'm going to pick up my 11O and my pale blue SuperDuo and I'm going to jump the gap. Move that out of the way. Pull that nice and tight. So you can now see we've got our 11Os starting to be added. So the next doesn't have an 11O, so we know it's going to be straightforward pale blue SuperDuo. Pull that nice and tight. So as you're turning, you can actually see the previous row, so you know that this time we need to then add an 11O and a SuperDuo into the next dark blue. Pull the needle through and just keep cinching every time you do it, because what we want to do is we want to start making a little beaded bead dome. So I'm just going to do a few more little sections. So we look at the previous row, there's no 11O there, so we know we're just adding a pale blue 11O. Then we're going to pull that nice and tight. Now we know it's the 11O route. So we want an 11O and a SuperDuo. So this is the 6th bead. Pull that nice and tight. And then we know that the next gap has only a SuperDuo, no 11O. So this is the 7th bead. Pull that nice and tight, give it a bit of a wiggle, and then our last little gap here is going to be an 11O and a pale blue. So 11O and a pale blue, and we're going to jump the gap into the dark blue. So I'm not going to step up yet, we're just going to pull all our beads in position. So at the moment it looks like a little pineapple. Okay, so you can now see we've got that perfect little beaded bead dome forming. So what we're going to do next is, again, we need to do a step up. Every round we do a step up. So I'm coming out of the blue, dark blue, I'm going to go into the first pale blue, and then I'm going to step up to the outside of that pale blue, so we know we're in the right direction. So we know that we had 2 rows of these little 11Os at the top. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to sew without a bead into the first 11O, like so. So you can see it cinches together. So we're coming out of the first SuperDuo, we're going to add the next, which will fill in the gap, like so. And then we're going to go across into the next. Again, pulling that nice and tight, so you can start to see our little round starting to form. So let's pull back a little bit. Okay, so we've added a SuperDuo. We're going to jump the gap to cinch everything in nice and neatly. Then we're going to pop in a SuperDuo. And then jump into the next, putting that nice and tight. And we should be left with 4 SuperDuos at the end. Through 2. There we go, and then we're going to do our last. So pick up SuperDuo, jump through 1, and then cinch the 2 together. Okay, so now can you see we've got our 4 SuperDuos to cinch the whole thing together. But before we do that, we take one of our 8mm gemstones. I'm just going to make sure we can get our head pin through. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our gemstone, we're going to drop it in so it sits snugly inside that little beaded bead. And then before we do anything else, what we need to do is we need to take our head pin, come up through the base of our, can you see we're coming up through the base of our little beaded bead. But first of all, I'm going to add a bit more colour. So I'm going to pick up a little 4mm round. And then while that's still in position, I'm going to come up through. So can you see I've come up through the middle of the base of the beaded bead. I've come up through the gemstone. And now what I'm going to do is, this is quite fiddly, but it's easier to do it now than try to find the hole in that gemstone afterwards. Is we're going to pull nice and tight. I'm going to sew, because I'm exiting this SuperDuo here, I'm going to sew into the next one, because we always need to do a step up every single round. And then I'm going to step up, nice and tight. And then, do you remember at the beginning we had our 4 11Os with our 4 SuperDuo diamond. So we're going to replicate this at the top. So I'm going to pick up an 11O, jump the gap, pull that nice and tight. I'm going to do the same with the next one. So an 11O, jump the gap, pulling nice and tight. So you can see it's starting now concertina around the head pin. You could do the beaded bead first and then add the head pin later, but you have to then, you'll be putting the head pin through the beaded bead blind, and you won't be able to find the hole in the pearl. And then we'll sew through the last bead. Sometimes the 11O is a bit closed, so we'll choose a new 11O. Sew into the next SuperDuo, like so. Pull that as tight as you can, so you can see that beaded bead shape. And then all I'm going to do to finish off is I'm just going to sew through all of those beads that we've just added, so the SuperDuos and the 11Os, pulling as tight as you can. And again, you'll probably need to go through 3 or 4 times. If you wanted a more rounder shape, you could pop in a 10mm round, but I think for this tutorial I've shown you an 8mm round is the perfect size, because you still have that freedom and that movement. So I'm just saying round and round through the SuperDuos. I think we're pretty much there. There we go. Can we get that needle through? Just. So that's my perfect time now to stop. I can then cut off my working thread. And then you can, with all the beads that you've got left, you can now complete the rest of your earring. So I like to replicate either side of my beaded bead. So you can now perfectly see a perfectly round spherical beaded bead. There's a shell pearl hidden inside. The head pin's going all the way through. So let's pop on another 4mm shell pearl. And then I'm going to pop on, let's go for one of these. Let's go for a purple. So this is a 6mm. And then we'll pop on another of our 4mm rounds. And then to replicate the little ball at the end of our head pin, I'm going to pop on an 11O seed bead at the end there, to pop that on so it replicates it. And then at this point, you would make your little eye pin loop and you'd pop on your shepherd hook. There you have your beaded bead. So you still get the rotation, you still get the movement all the way around. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I've made this into a pair of earrings, but there's nothing stopping you making 10 or 15 of these and threading through. So you still need a bead inside. I'm going to make a really nice pendant as well, but you still need the bead inside to keep that nice round shape. Otherwise it would flatten together, and then you can thread that on some beading thread or memory wire or something like that. But it's absolutely beautiful. So as you can see with the completed earrings, inside there is a little hidden gemstone or a shell pearl or a glass round bead. And these earrings here are using micro SuperDuos. They're the smaller version, the little mini duos. And again, you can see the difference in the sizes. But that's basically your lovely SuperDuo beaded bead with a hidden surprise on the inside. So that was our last chapter, unfortunately, in our introduction to SuperDuos. There are so many more tutorials that I want to show you, so I promise you there will be another JewelleryMaker Academy tutorial all about the wonderful SuperDuos. But thank you very much for spending the time with me. I hope you've enjoyed all of the tutorials and you have a go at all of them yourselves, especially the ropes, though we shouldn't have any favourites. My name's been Mark Smith. Thank you very much for joining me. Make sure you look on the JewelleryMaker website for any brand new tutorials coming up in the JewelleryMaker Academy section. Hope you enjoyed the hour and hope to see you all again soon.